You shall not steal. Like I said, I recognize the irony of this after the government just stole another hour of your life last night. So we've been doing this series on the Ten Commandments. And the whole idea that we've called this series is 10 Values That Build Strong Families, because there's this parallel with what happened with the nation of Israel. You know, they had been slaves in Egypt, and they are coming out of that, and they go out, they get these 10 commandments from God. And the thing that's interesting is it wasn't just these commandments. God actually gave them lots of other commandments as well. But there's something special about this. It's labeled as the 10 Commandments. And part of that is the fact that I think as we've been going through this series, that it is very much about who they are becoming. It is an identity kind of thing. There's something really deep in the midst of all this. And I think that's parallel to the idea of a family as well. When you are forming a family and you really want to build a strong family, one of the questions would be, who are we and who are we to become? And so as we look at these commandments, we could take the very simple way of doing it. And if you're following along in your sermon outline there in your worship folder, the first one is just don't steal. I mean, it's simple. 2 words. It's 4 words in the commandment, thou shalt not steal, but actually in Hebrew it is only 2 words. Super simple, and if you want that simple idea of just hearing the command, great. Don't do it. We could go really simple. As a matter of fact, I think there would be some advantage. It always really struck me that theft generally it's hypocrisy. Everybody I've ever known that has ever stolen, that has ever done this kind of thing, wants a society where nobody else steals from them. Like, they don't want to be stolen from. They want to be the one that can do it, they can take it. I remember when I first came to the realization, or one of the times that it really struck me, is by that great theologian, Hans Gruber, in Die Hard. I remember him saying the story. You don't know the story. I mean, they're stealing a bunch of bearer bonds, and he makes this claim as he's talking about how they're going to work this out. The FBI is going to come, the helicopters, they're going to blow the roof. And he says, well, when they touch down, we'll blow the roof. They'll spend a month sifting through rubble. And by the time they figure out what went wrong, we'll be sitting on a beach earning 20%. And I can't even say that without hearing Alan Rickman's voice as he does that. But that idea, I'm going to sit there and earn 20%. I said, wow, first of all, that's an amazing rate of return. But the other part is just this idea that he's counting that there will be a financial system where he can take his money that he has rightfully stolen and put that in a system. Nobody else takes it from them, but they're willing to pay him for the use of this money. You know, this idea that we should have a system where I get to steal, but others don't. Maybe another example might be Kimu. I don't know how many of you remember her. Right out here out front, she set up this huge amount of stuff that she had collected. And I'm going to assume she stole it, unless somehow she was able to buy like 18 or 30 of these grocery carts and other things. And she had set this up, and she had collected this stuff, and things were growing. And for those of you who don't know, who weren't around during this time, that's one person's stuff. That's just one person there and all that stuff. And she would collect this stuff. She would be taking it from wherever she could get it. She had all these things, but nothing made her more angry than if somebody else touched her things. I remember having to collect our trash cans from her on an almost, maybe not daily basis, but weekly basis, because she'd come and grab them and do so. And that idea of, you know, it's out there, and I want it. I don't have it, therefore I take it, but I don't want anybody else to. Stealing is, at some level, the height of hypocrisy. And so maybe it makes sense. Most of the sermons, as I was researching this for this week and talking and looking what other people had talked about and preached, so many of the sermons were really just about, well, let me tell you all the ways a modern person might be trying to steal. And, you know, they can have sermons on, you know, tax evasion or, you know, working, trying to take extra breaks when you work that you're not entitled to, or not paying your employees, or whatever it is, and we'll try to talk about that. But I would rather go deeper. And I would rather that we look a little bit more deeply into this concept of theft. And I want to talk about, well, why do we steal? Now, I'm not necessarily accusing any of us here, but what is it in our lives, or the lives of people as we do that? What's going on in their hearts? And the thing that's interesting, by the way, I have to tell you, so I have this plan to prepare and have the sermon notes ready on Thursday, to have them available so that Carrie Ann can print them on Friday when she comes in and get that all printed for you. And we did all that, and then all Friday, I just couldn't get over the fact that what I was going to talk about didn't feel right. So I came in yesterday morning and worked on it, and then Carrie Ann said, oh, okay, well, let me make new worship folders. So these worship folders are fresh off the press for you, to try to cover this, the concepts I think as we go deeper that's kind of important. The first thing about why somebody might steal, why we would do that, is because we believe that there's just stuff is limited, right? There's only so much out there. There's only so much gold. There's only so much oil. There's only so much of these things. And if there's only so much, then since it's a zero-sum game, the more somebody else has, the less I have. And so I need to be working to make sure I get as much as I can. That's at least some level of what I want. And part of what I was going to talk about before I reformed this is I really wanted to spend a lot of time talking about how counterintuitive to that, this whole establishment of this 8th commandment actually works against this principle. What I mean by God establishing property rights, there in this idea of the 8th commandment, which it says, do not steal, which implies there are things that belong to you and things that don't. And this idea of there being property rights, and countries that really lean into that idea of having property rights and have a culture of doing it tend to do really, really well. And as a globe, things have gotten better. Things here in our country that if by certain measures, we actually have more things as a result of living into this do not steal. Like, for example, I remember when I was a young kid, on Christmas morning, there would be oranges in our stocking. Now, it really didn't matter a lot to us, but that happened because my parents grew up in a time, oranges, especially in the middle of winter, were incredibly difficult to get. Like, you don't get that. That was a luxury beyond luxury, and it was difficult to get. However, indulge me, I had to use this graph anyway. This is from a website called Human Progress. If you ever get a chance, I think it's really cool to look at humanprogress.org. They have this little calculator that they call an abundance calculator, and they show something. I know it's tough to read, but I'll show you this. First, we're looking at 1919, and what they did is they took the average price of an orange in that time, divided by the average wage. And they came up with an amount of time. So it took you can get 0.472 dozen oranges, so about 6 oranges in an hour. It took you an hour to work to get about a half a dozen of oranges, right? And then you multiply that by the population at the time, which is 105 million in the United States, and you get that little graph. That's how abundant oranges were. That many people, that many oranges, that's how long it took. So then if you come into 2024, the average wage will get you over a dozen and a half oranges in just 1 hour's work. And this is, when I say the average wage, I mean the average unskilled wage. Somebody who's just starting out. We're not talking about CEOs. We're talking about people that are, working at Jersey Mike's or something. But this is how much you could get, and multiply that by the population, and you get this much abundance of oranges. So the difference by math, you look at the hypotenuse, 1,000-fold increase in the abundance of oranges. And the thing is you can use this and plug it in. You'll see that's true even counterintuitive stuff like oil and gold and these fixed assets. It's amazing. It's amazing. And this whole idea that maybe things aren't as limited as we imagine, maybe they're not. But for the purpose of this morning, I'm going to concede that things are limited. especially if we measure it against what we want. Like if I think about the things I want or the things I've convinced myself I need, then there's a huge difference between what I have and what I want. There's a huge difference between what I have and what I've convinced myself I even need. You know what normal is. When I grew up, normal was we had 5 of us living in a 3-bedroom, 1-bath house of about 1,000 square feet or less. That was normal. And we weren't by any means poor necessarily. We were very working class where I was growing up. That was normal. But that would seem incredibly restrictive today. So when we think about those wants and needs, that there's always, I want more, I need more, and there's only so much. What am I supposed to do about that? But there's another belief as well that encourages us to just say, well, let's just take it. Let's find a way to work the system, to gain advantage, to take from somebody else who has, is the fact it's all up to us alone. That we believe it's all up to us by ourselves. That nobody else is looking out for me. Maybe the people who are supposed to, whether it's, I don't know, the government or my parents, like they're not doing enough, they haven't given enough, and I have to do this on my own. Like no, and it's all about my wiles or my ability to take and to have. And I think that is true in all cases of theft. Whether we're talking corporate theft, you know, I was talking with Luke this past week. We were talking about the scandal with Honey. How many of you are familiar with that one? Nobody. Oh, 2. No, Luke doesn't even get to raise his hand. Thank you, Luke. The fact that what happened is, you know, if you go to a website, let's say somebody's saying, hey, buy this product from Amazon, and you click their little link, and you go to Amazon and you buy it, that link that you clicked has a little code in it so that they know where you got it from, and they will reimburse, they'll give some money to the person who sent you there. Well, what Honey did is they said, well, you know, if you put this on you, and they got these people to put on there, says, what we'll do is you click on this and we'll track and we'll look for all the best deals on all the websites to see if you're getting the best deal. And maybe they go, nope, you found it right here on Amazon. That's the best price you're going to get. Definitely get it now. But what was happening when you click that is they were redoing the entire signal so that the person that sent you there wasn't getting the extra money, but Honey themselves were. So they would get all the referral money from these folks. Stealing from them. I don't know that it's necessarily illegal stealing. I don't know. I don't know enough about it. But the truth is they're saying, hey, we need to make sure we get it, and we're going to have to take it from them to do it. So I think these concepts at play, there's limited stuff, and it's up to us to be smarter and more clever. And I think it's certainly at, whether you're stealing from your neighbor's garage, shoplifting for profit or fun. When I say for profit, we've told this story before, but the Ulta down here in Gresham, there was a guy that was stealing daily from them during the pandemic. And as the cops would go, and they actually caught him a few times, and he would say, nope, I know the new rules. This is less than $950 worth of stuff. The DA won't prosecute me. And he was right. As soon as he got the stuff, they came up with the value, even though he was booked. They found it was less. The DA didn't prosecute. He got out and kept doing it. But even for fun, I had a friend in high school who shoplifted when she was younger. There were some pens she wanted, and she just decided to get them. And in part, she tells the story. She says, it wasn't even really I couldn't afford to buy pens. That wasn't the issue. I could have done it, but there was some kind of fun and exciting about seeing if I can get away with this and get something that somebody else, and I'm just going to do that. That'll be fun. Apparently it wasn't as fun when she got caught, because back then, she had a record that as long as she stayed clean was going to be expunged by the time she hit 21. But she always had that was hanging over her for a good long while. But I think these same principles are at work. But maybe there's another way to look at it. If instead, I'm going to read a passage let me just read it. Some of you are really familiar with it, and you know there's more to the story, and I'm not going to get into more of the story. I just want to set up the beginning. Here in Matthew 25. Jesus is given this parable. He had talked about what the kingdom of heaven is like, and he gives this other one here in Matthew 25. And he says, again, meaning the kingdom of heaven, the kingdom of God, that if we operate in the world like God would want us to operate, It'd be like a man going on a journey who called his servants and entrusted his wealth to them. To one he gave 5 bags of gold, to another 2 bags, and to another 1 bag. Now, for those of you maybe more familiar, remember that in most translations they'll use the word talent because that was actually a measure of gold. It was about 20 years worth of a working guy's income. But the thing is we've told that so many times, that passage so many times, and talked about how it's not just money, it's also your abilities, it's also your time and all that kind of stuff, that the word talent has come to mean in modern English, one of the phrases we have when we say, hey, you've got talent. It literally comes from this bags of gold thing. But so the NIV decides to use the term bags of gold, which, that works. 5 bags of gold, 2 bags, and another 1 bag, each according to his ability. Then he went on his journey, and the man who had received 5 bags of gold went at once, put his money to work, gained 5 bags more. So also the one with 2 bags of gold gained 2 more. But the man who had received 1 bag went off, dug a hole in the ground, and hid his master's money. Now after a long time, the master of those servants returned and settled accounts with them. The man who had received 5 bags of gold brought the other 5. Master, he said, you entrusted me with 5 bags of gold. See, I've gained 5 more. And his master replied, well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful with a few things. I will put you in charge of many things. Come and share your master's happiness. The man with 2 bags of gold also came. Master, he said, you entrusted me with 2 bags of gold. See, I have gained 2 more. His master replied, exactly the same. Well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful with a few things. I will put you in charge of many things. Come and share your master's happiness. Now, when we typically preach this passage, we go on to the other verses about how the one guy, he didn't do anything with it, didn't gain anything, nothing came of it. And the master pointed out that his unwillingness to use what he had was wicked and lazy. But I want to center in on this first part because it says something very much about how God operates that I think is worth looking at. One, and the next one in your outline, God has given us temporary ownership. You see, the master gave over these bags of gold. He gave according to their ability. He gave them something and says, you own it. You own it. It's yours. Like, ultimately, at some level, it's still mine. That concept called stewardship. You have what is mine, but use it. Use it as you think best. Use it as I think best. Use it as I would use it. And so to have that, he has temporary ownership, and that God has given us all a portion of something. And it's not all the same. One guy gets 5, another gets 2, another gets 1. And so the fact that we do have it, and again, as I point out, it's not just money. It could be your talents and your smarts. I mean, I see a lot of really smart people here. I see a couple dumb ones too, but I won't look at you directly. When we, the thing is as we do that God has given us, where do you think you got that? I mean, you're born with that ability, you've worked hard, I get it, but at some level, you have been given the opportunities and the talents, pun intended, as well as even stuff. God divvies it up, and it's not all going to be even. And the issue here is, what are you doing, not with what you have? What are you doing with what God has already given you? I mean, to be far better, can you imagine the scenario where he says, so, what did you do to the guy with 2 bags of gold? What did you do with what I gave you? And he says, well, I didn't think it was fair, so I went and took some from the guy who had 5 because I didn't figure he'd miss much. That's what I did. I got that. And the master's like, that doesn't help me at all. That's not better. That's not better. Like, you just transferred who had stewardship. But as followers of God, what we're saying is that to some extent, we have property rights, we do this, but that God is ultimately in charge, that everything we have belongs to him. So one, that God has given it to us, but it's temporary. The passage in Job where, so much was given to him, and he says, naked I was born and naked I'll die. The Lord gives and the Lord takes away. Secondly, we should multiply. There's something real advantageous to the idea of taking whatever God has given you and produce more with it. Make more, do more. I read an article this week that was talking about saying, we send missionaries throughout the world, and should we send like pastor types who are going to go and share the gospel and share spiritual truths with people? And said, yeah, we should do that. Should we send like doctors and nurses and construction people that will build houses and care for the sick? And it's like, yeah, of course we should do that. But could we also send people who will go and start businesses and developing places that can do that in a way that is ethical and right, that treats their employees well, that does this? Can we go? Is that worth doing as well? And the article was overwhelmingly yes, there is real benefit because, if we're producing, again, you had 5 bags and produce another 5, employing people, doing things in an ethical and wonderful way matters. It's beautiful to take the talents you're given and to work hard and increase them. It's beautiful that you do that, and there's something ennobling about it. I know we live in a world, and we'll probably talk about this more in a couple weeks, where we see people with either more talents or more brains or better looking, and definitely people with more money, and judge them for not doing what we righteous people would do if we had all that. And matter of fact, they should probably give some to us. Well, the main question, and notice, remember, I pointed that out. When the master came back and asked the guy with 2 bags of gold what he had done, and he said, well, I multiplied it. What he multiplied wasn't even nearly as much as what the first guy got when he started. But that's not how God judged it. He said, you did well with what you had. Well done, good and faithful servant. The last part that I think is absolutely essential to know is that we will have to give an accounting at some point. We're going to have to stand in front of the master and say, and when he asks us, what did you do with what I gave you? And we're going to have to give an answer to that. We're going to have an answer. Did you use it well? I'm trying to imagine. I really believe that, like, how do you get there? If you really don't believe that God exists, you don't really believe that he's going to have an accounting. You don't really even think, like maybe you're like the Gnostics in the early Christian world, the heresy that existed says, there's spiritual stuff and then there's real life stuff. There's the body and the things that we do, and then there's spiritual stuff, and the God only cares about the spiritual realm. He doesn't care about practical everyday money and work and kind of thing. Like, if you believe that, like, how do we convince you something else? And I think it goes back to what I pointed out at the beginning. That sense of there's limited stuff and it's up to me alone. If nothing else, I would want you to see that there is a God who cares so deeply for you that you're not alone. You're not on your own. That's the story of the gospel. Do you realize that's the very story of Jesus when he says, you know what? I know things are broken. I know that it's not just about knowledge. You can have rules, you can know that, and even the rules you have for yourself that aren't quite as good as mine, you don't even live up to those. Like, I get it, and it feels like impossible. How do we, as broken, sinful creatures that just seem to be focused on our own stuff and not caring about others, like, what do we do with that? And God says, look, I want to change the system for you. It's not just a matter of how good you are, and are you perfect enough? I want to change the system to where I will come down there. I will make sure there's a price that's paid because justice demands that, but I will pay the price. I will self-sacrifice so that you and I can just go forward together. Figure out what it means to follow me. Figure out how to live, and we'll do this together. I will forgive you. If you're willing to operate in me, then you've got this whole other system. And I wonder, can we begin to look at that and see that maybe it is true that I'm not here alone? That stuff isn't as limited. It's really only limited by the power of God. I don't know. I don't know if we can see that. But I do know for those of us who have seen it, there's one surefire test about whether or not you actually believe it or you just say it. And that is, are we generous? You see, if we really believed that stuff wasn't limited, and we really believed that God could do all things, and it wasn't up to me, we could be generous. We could first be generous to the church. I don't want to spend a lot of time on this because it feels really self-serving. I know I'm a pastor. I get my paycheck here, and me saying, hey, give more. Like, I know how that sounds, so I don't want to talk about it, but I think it's probably worth literally mentioning because Scripture does. I mean, look at this passage in Malachi. Will a mere mortal rob God? Yet you rob me. Well, but you ask, and how are we robbing you? And he says, in tithes and offerings. That God is expecting tithes, he's expecting offerings, and we rob him when we don't do it. But where I'd really like to focus is on the second one, and that is being generous to the poor. I think this is absolutely vital in one of the areas that we absolutely need to hear. There's a story in the first chapter of Steve Jobs' biography, literally titled Steve Jobs by Walter Isaacson. And he was talking about, he says when he was 13, Jobs saw a photograph on the cover of Life magazine of some starving children in Biafra. I have no idea where that even is. I'm assuming somewhere in Africa. And he brought it to Sunday school and confronted the church's pastor. And he says, if I raise my finger, will God know which one I'm going to raise even before I do it? And the pastor answered, well, yeah, God knows everything. And then Jobs then pulled out a Life cover and says, well, does God know about this? And what's going to happen to those children? And he says, Steve, I know you don't understand, but yes, God knows about that. Jobs announced that he didn't want to have anything to do with worshiping such a God, and he never went back to church. You see, the idea that there are those who are suffering. Suffering maybe because of broken systems, because of governments that refuse to honor property rights, because of all kinds of things, and sees that as a God he doesn't want anything to do with. But I tell you, as most of the people I talk to that aren't Christian, the overwhelming answer I get that bothers them the most is if there is suffering out there and there's a good and perfect and all-powerful God, there shouldn't be suffering. I shouldn't suffer. People I know of shouldn't suffer. Nobody should suffer. And while I think there are legitimate answers to that, I think the pastor lost an opportunity to say something deep. And that is something about the poor. Dorothy Day wrote, we must talk about poverty because people insulated by their own comfort lose sight of it. The gospel takes away our right forever to discriminate between the deserving and the undeserving poor. We must act, not just pray. There is incumbent upon us this broken world, and we look at a world, and I don't have a lot of sympathy for people who say, well, God should do more, and they do nothing themselves. But then how about the idea that you and I are called as followers of Jesus, if we are followers, that we must do something, and we must be generous to the poor. How generous? I don't know. I don't know that there's anything wrong with enjoying what God has given you. He literally says that you can enjoy it. Throw a birthday party for your 6-year-old, and you don't necessarily have to feel guilty because that money could have gone to the poor. But at some level, we do need to be actively generous to make a difference. How does that work in any given scenario? In Mere Christianity, C.S. Lewis says, Christianity has not and does not profess to have a detailed political program for applying do as you would be done to a particular society at a particular moment. It could not have. It is meant for all people at all times. And the particular program which suited one place at one time may not suit another. So I love that he says this. I don't know what it means. Should you always hand out money to anybody who asks? help programs and donate to programs and do it, and one to the exclusion, whatever. It's less about that. And he says, this absence of a program does not mean the absence of action. Charity, giving to the poor, is an essential part of Christian morality. I do not believe one can settle how much we ought to give. I'm afraid the only safe rule is give more than we can spare. So ultimately, I want to leave you with this morning. We could take this very simple approach to this commandment and say, just don't steal. Don't shoplift. Don't sit there and excuse it. Target will never miss this. It doesn't matter. Like, that whole thing is a hypocrisy of the highest order. But maybe we go to another level and realize that we are blessed well beyond what we deserve. And that to hold on to even what we just have is selfish. And that instead we should be making a difference in the lives of others. We should be generous with our church and the ministry that it does. We should be generous in giving to the poor, whatever that looks like. I've got some ideas. If you're interested in ways that you can do that, I would love to tell you about it afterwards. But the real issue is, are you willing? Or third, for those of you who are here and you're struggling, I want you to know you're not alone. God has given you everything you need to do what he's asked you to do. And I know that can sound really scary, because the truth is, there will be one time we'll reach into our pocket and there will be nothing more. We will have given all we have given. We one day will give our very lives, and it'll be over. And it's not saying God always going to take care of you, meaning you're ever going to have everything you want or even everything you ever think you need. But you will have everything you need, not only for now, but for eternity, if you want that system. But the implication of that system is living out this life of abundance that God has given us all that we need. And we should be like God, giving to others as well. Let's pray. Glorious God, I mean, it's easy to get up and say these kind of things, but the truth is it's really hard when you realize, man, I sure would like this. I'd like this kind of house, or I'd like this kind of life, and what if I could use this money? And it's so easy. I wake up in the morning and I think way more about my problems than I do other people's. And any way that money could solve it, and I think, man, if I could just have more. And at its root, Lord, I really think that I'm just not trusting that you have already given me all that I need to do what you've asked me to do. So forgive me. Forgive me for my selfishness. Forgive me for the times that I'm not generous enough, whether it's to the church, whether it's to the poor. Help me to live that out. Of course, Lord, I've got plenty of instances in my life where I've taken, where I've stolen. Some of them definitely illegal. Others maybe not so illegal, but still a heart that says, no, mine, I want. Forgive me. I need the system that says you and I are going to live this out together. Help me to live out this command. Help me to live out your will. In Jesus' name. Amen? All right, so we have this time where we're just got a couple minutes of what we call open worship. It's a chance if you want to stand where you are and share what God has put on your heart. We'll hear you, but we're not going to listen to you. Because our idea is to try to listen to what God might be saying through you. And so we're willing to listen to that. And whether it's somebody speaks or we spend the next couple minutes in silence, and I'll close us in a couple minutes.